to you before you need them for your college applications. And also know that colleges are very, very well aware that there have been a lot of disruptions in the testing schedule. So that's not something you need to worry about so much in terms of will I be able to get it done? The answer to that is a definitive yes. Between the ACT, potentially offering other testing dates, and between colleges knowing that there have been some difficulties there, you will be able to get these test scores in time, done in the way that the colleges are looking for. Now, after that, we're going to look at some ACT strategies and content for each of those sessions. So we're going to cover all 4 of those sessions. So we won't be able to spend, of course, a deep dive into each of them, but we are going to cover some of those key takeaways, those high point skills and strategies that you'll want for English, math, reading, and science. So that's going to be the bulk of what we talk about today. And we will do some practice questions along the way there. We'll talk about some opportunities to score higher, as well as some tips for success. Now, I do want to point out, I know that I think Katie has already mentioned this in the chat, but this is a moderated chat. So if you're typing a comment and you don't see it come through, it's nothing personal. There are a lot of us here today, and there's a lot of chats coming in at once. I guarantee we see every single one of your chats coming through. If we were just to open the floodgates and let all those chats rush in, you wouldn't even know, in fact, whether your comment came through or not, because that chat would move so quickly you couldn't even see it. And you wouldn't be able to see our responses to you. We wouldn't be able to see your questions. It would just move so fast that nobody could see anything, and it would really become quite useless. So because of that, we do keep a moderated chat, and that way we can kind of control the flow of the chats coming through, which means that just by virtue of a lot of people sometimes responding similarly or asking similar questions, it might not be yours specifically that comes through, but it doesn't mean that there's anything against what you asked or what you said or what your personal response was. It just means that it just happened to not be able to be let through at that time. So, so know that that's the reason. There's no need to keep typing why is my chat not going through? Why is my chat not going through? Because we're also not going to bog the chat down with those chats either. So if your chat doesn't go through, just be like, oh, well, someone else probably asked that same question. So look for the answer from Katie, Steve, Chris, or Laura in the chat to a question very similar to yours, if that's the case. So I'm sure you all know why you're here, but feel free to tell us your personal reasons for being here practicing for the ACT tonight. For most of you, it's going to be because you are planning to apply to college or to some sort of kind of post-high school or secondary, post-secondary program. And the ACT is a component of many of those applications. So when we're talking about, what are some of those kind of roadblocks to being accepted, a low GPA is definitely one of the big ones, but a low standardized test score is also a big component here. I want to point out, since there's a lot of us, this is happening online, lots of things are moving online right now. Look at this, questionable social media is another big component here. So if you're ever wondering should I put this on something like Instagram or Facebook or some of these other programs, do note that a lot of college admissions officers do in fact look at your social media or Google your name when they are looking over your application. So if you have some stuff out there that you might think is a little questionable, go ahead and take those off. You want to be presenting yourself in a good way possible with your online presence as well. Okay, so let's look at this overall ACT structure. English, math, reading, and science. It's standardized, which means it's going to be the exact same order every single time. Now, Gabby asked a great question. Do you recommend taking the ACT more than once? And Gabby, a lot of people do. And in fact, colleges, universities, and even we say there's absolutely no downside other than, of course, having to spend an extra Saturday and that registration fee taking the test again. That's really the only downside to having to take the test more than once. Otherwise, the only positive things can happen, especially if you are practicing and preparing and studying in between taking the test. You don't just want to take it, do absolutely nothing, and then take it again. Probably not going to see your scores go up much. But certainly if you took the ACT, you thought, okay, this is a good baseline, but I want to get better. Then practicing, studying, and taking it again, you can certainly see your scores go up that way. That said, always best to get those baseline scores done with a practice test so that you know what to study rather than with an official test. That way you can save your official test taking opportunities for when you're like, okay, got it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to knock this out. Now, one of the advantages to knowing the structure of the ACT is that you can know exactly what to expect on test day. And how many of you, like even just thinking about the ACT, maybe even being here tonight, kind of start getting a little bit nervous, right? Just like thinking of it overall, like, oh my gosh, this is a really big thing. Kind of even nervous to be here today. What if I don't know the answers to the questions that Stephanie asked? What if I don't know? It can certainly be kind of anxiety producing because it is a pretty big deal, right? It's an important component of your applications, and your college applications are an important part of your kind of future plans. So one of the ways we can turn some of that unknown anxiety into like known, manageable uncertainty is to become familiar with something like the structure, the timing, the question types, what's on it, how's it going to look, what am I expected to do, how am I expected to answer the questions. Any of those questions that are currently maybe unknowns that you can turn into knowns are going to decrease the stress associated with something like taking the ACT. Now, there's no maximum times you can take the test. I take that back. It's like 10 times a year. I think that's how many times they offer it. You really shouldn't be taking it, honestly, that often, because if you're taking it that often and you're not seeing the types of improvements that you're needing, you probably need to just change up what you're doing, how you're preparing or how you're studying for it. And so you don't need to take it every single time it's offered, but you certainly can. Okay, so let's delve into some of the strategies and content for the ACT, yeah? Okay, so first thing, let's talk about English. Now, the English test is sometimes thought of as a grammar test, and there's definitely a lot of grammar on the English test. We're going to talk about some of those grammar rules here today. But there's also questions that aren't grammar related that are also on the ACT English test. And so knowing what is and what isn't tested on the ACT is going to be huge in terms of your ability to really feel confident in your answer choices. Now, I know some of you have asked about, are there going to be other sessions like this down the road? We are actually going to do a workshop on English and reading next week, so take a look for that one. I think that'll be next Tuesday, in fact, and we can dig a little bit deeper into it. But here's how we're going to focus on this method. So the first thing you want to do is identify the issue. And when we talk about identifying the issue, what we're talking about is, what is the question testing me on? Because the ACT English test tests very specific things. There are things that are tested and there are things that are not. And often what we find is that students focus too much on trying to fix things that aren't actually tested. Like, what sounds better? That's going to be a really difficult thing for the ACT to say, well, this one definitively sounds better and these definitively sound wrong. Because what sounds better is often a case of personal preference, especially when two things are grammatically correct. So knowing what is and what isn't tested allows you to really answer the question in the way that the question wants. For instance, maybe it's testing grammar. Okay, but maybe it's testing which of these answer choices is on topic. Or maybe it's testing which of these is transitioning appropriately or effectively. So knowing exactly what you're having to do enables you to really narrow down your choices from like, I don't know, what sounds good, to be like, oh, I need to look at this one thing or these two things, I can fix them, and now I can confidently answer. And by the way, that is really going to help you be confident selecting no change, because no change is going to be right about, well, it's an answer option about 25% of the time. So it's going to be right about 25% of the time. But I bet you feel kind of like nervous selecting no change, right? Like, is there an issue that I've missed? Is there something that did I not see it? Did I not catch it? And so when you know exactly what the question is testing, you're like, okay, the issue here is subject verb agreement. I checked, I saw the subject, I saw the verb, I know it's right. Then you can select no change and be like, bam, no change, grab it and go. The next thing you're going to do is eliminate choices that don't fix the issue. Again, if you know the problem and they're not fixing it, get rid of them. And finally, plug in the remaining answer choices. And these need to be three things: correct, concise, and relevant. Let's first talk about correct. Well, that means grammatically correct, right? So we're feeling kind of pretty good about the fact that that's what that means. What about concise? Tell me in the chat, what does it mean to be concise? I'm going to apologize right now to Chris and Laura and Steve and Katie, because I'm just like, tell me in the chat. I don't know. All of you are going to say this and it's going to be right. We're going to say like, whole big flood of chats here. But yeah, so to be concise is to say something in the shortest way possible. So we want to be grammatically correct using as few words as possible. And finally, the choice that we select needs to be relevant, which means it needs to be on topic. It needs to be related to the passage. I sometimes like to think of relevancy as consistent. Like, is the topic consistent? Is the tone consistent? Is the style consistent with the rest of the passage? Because if we had, say, like a really, really neutral passage, like the author's not making an opinion at all, and then suddenly we like stick a sentence in that's like really, really judgmental, that wouldn't really fit, even if it was, grammatically fine. So we want to make sure that all three of these things are true of our answer choice. Is it correct grammatically? Is it concise? Is it short and sweet, short to the point? And is it consistent with topic and style? So let's look at some of these English content areas that do come up, especially when we're talking about grammar. Subject-verb agreement. The verb must agree with its subject. Now, when we have the subject and the verb right next to each other, this is often something that our ears, especially, if you're a native English speaker or if you are around a lot of native English speakers, this is something that your ears are probably going to pick up on. Because when the subject and the verb are right next to each other, our ears are like, that's not how we say that. What you have to be aware of, though, is sometimes the verb is not right next to the subject. So in this case, apples taste delicious. The apple tastes delicious, right? There's always going to be an S either on the verb or on the subject when we're talking about singular and plural. But if the verb and the subject aren't next to each other because maybe they're separated by a parenthetical phrase, or maybe they're separated by some non-essential information with a comma, then we have to actually go back and say, okay, what is the subject that's doing this verb? What is the pairing there? And make sure they line up. We could also see this if we have words like each. Each one always is singular, and the conjunction and always makes things plural. So for instance, Celia and Taylor, well, they are in the running club because and makes it plural. But if I use either or neither nor, this is still singular. Either Celia or Taylor is in the running club, neither Celia nor Taylor. And so sometimes your ears might hear this one and say like, I don't know, that's a little bit odd. So we have to look for those other context clues. In this case, the either or the neither nor keeps things singular. Now, just like we have subject-verb agreement, we also have to have pronoun agreement. And again, anytime you have a pronoun underlined, you must go back and ask yourself, okay, what is the noun that is being referred to by this pronoun? Now, if you want to get all fancy about it, we can call that the pronoun's antecedent. You don't get any bonus points for being able to spell antecedent on test day, but you do need to be able to know what this is so that you can go find it, which is if you see a pronoun underlined, go find the noun that the pronoun is referring to. And that way you can match it up in terms of singular, plural, person versus object, right? We don't want to objectify people, well, in life, or with our grammar, right? I don't want to be like, oh, my neighbor, it gave me a book. Nor do we want to say things like, oh, the book, he is very interesting, right? So we don't want to confuse object and person pronouns there either. And we also want to make sure we're not confusing objective and subjective pronouns. So for instance, if I say I go to the store, I is me, but I wouldn't say me goes to the store. And so those are the other objective and subjective pronouns. We usually see the biggest difference with those with the who versus whom. Like who goes to the store is an objective pronoun, and who is a subjective pronoun. It's the subject, it does the verb, whereas whom is an objective pronoun. So those are some of the things we have to check for with pronoun agreement. I always like to remember it, who plus a verb. Always going to be a verb after who. You're not going to have a verb after whom. And that's how I like to remember that one. So here we have a couple examples like Addison, she. Now let's look at this it. Tell me in the chat, what is thriving? This is where I say sometimes this is the closest noun, just like with a verb. But look at this, flowers was. This verb is not referring to the flowers, right? This verb is referring back to, oh, there it is, the sapling. Just like this it is referring back to the sapling. So the sapling was, the sapling it. So in this case, our subject is kind of far away from both the verb and the pronoun. We have to go back and make sure that those align. If students are confused, they, so singular plural. If a student, he or she should ask for clarification. Now, modifiers, misplaced modifiers are so fun because these are the types of things that if you were to draw them out literally, if the modifiers in the wrong spot, things can get pretty hilarious pretty quickly. A modifier just describes something, and we have words that are modifiers, adjectives, adverbs, but we also have modifying phrases. And modifiers always are going to be modifying the very closest subject to them, the very closest noun. So an efficient lab experiment, adjective modifying nouns, adverbs in efficiently conducted, adverbs modify everything else. Okay, enough theory. Let's do some practice here. So what I want us to do is I want us to practice the ACT English method, which means before you just jump in and start putting A, B, C, Ds in the chat, and by the way, please don't do that because we, one, want to keep the chat spoiler free. Two, there is a poll that you can submit your answers to instead. But three is that we want to do this method. We want to apply it here to really get that practice. So first thing we have to do is figure out, what is this question testing us on? What is the issue here? Go ahead and put that in the chat. What is question number one testing you on? One way to figure this out is to see what the different answer options are. So I've got a verb underlined, and if I look at my choices, they're all different. They're still verbs, but the verbs are a little bit different, right? I've got different verb tenses, would be, will have been, and I have different verb conjugations, singular versus plural. So the first thing we'd have to say here is, okay, this is going to be subject-verb agreement, and we're also going to have to think about verb tense. Okay, so now that we know what the issue is, well, we're going to eliminate any that don't work. Well, in this case, we're only going to have one. So we just have to go match up and figure out what the subject is, or in this case, who the subject is. So in this case, our subject is either Mia's mom or older brother. So we have a singular subject, as Ava says, singular or plural subject is what we have to think about. And since I have either Mia's mom or older brother, my subject is one of them. So one of them was available. Mia's mom was available, or Mia's older brother was available. And we're going to go and circle answer choice B and move on with our next question. Okay, here we go. Here is our next question. Again, let's do that same thing. First, identify what is the issue. What is this question testing you on? Okay, well, we have a pronoun underlined. And if I look at our different answer options, they are all different pronouns. It, their, them, or they. So we know that this is a pronoun issue. We're going to have to go ahead and find what this pronoun is going to agree with. So what I want you to tell me this time, I want you to figure out, tell me what the antecedent is. What had the opportunity to travel across the bridge? So we're not going to know if it's singular or plural or people versus object until we figure out what that antecedent is. And so if we look at this, for the 4 months in the fall of 1940, Citizens of the Puget Sound, citizens of the area use the bridge. Citizens had the opportunity to travel across the bridge. So citizens is the antecedent. Citizens are, for starters, people. So we wouldn't use it because it is referring to not a person, and we are referring to, in this case, people. People are also plural, so we would say they had the opportunity to travel across the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. Now notice we do have some other options here, right? Them would be the objective pronoun, right? Like I gave it to them, but them wouldn't travel. That's the difference between who versus whom. Who had the opportunity to travel, as opposed to whom are you going to visit? So that's the difference there. And finally, here is, I think we've got two more here. These ancient fragments, which had been preserved good by the dry environment. Now, if we look at our answer choices here, good, very good, quite well and thoroughly, or well, we can see that what this question is testing here is this modifier. How should we describe this? Now, one of the things to remember is that adjectives modify nouns and adverbs modify everything else. Now, most adverbs end in ly, but not all of them. There are a couple exceptions. For instance, very, V-E-R-Y, is an adverb, but it doesn't end in ly. It ends in just a single y. And this is another one of those instances where we have adverbs versus nouns. And so good is an adjective, right? We would use good to describe a noun. Like if anyone have a dog, your dogs are a very good boy, right? Good boys, all of your dogs, unless you have a dog that's like not a good boy. And I apologize, I'm sorry for that you have to deal with that. But good describes like how something is. Is that a good book? Was that a good meal? Is your dog a good boy? Whereas well is going to describe how something is done. Right? It is going to describe the verb form of something. So in this case, what we're describing is how they've been preserved. Well, the act of preserving is a verb. So we're going to want to use an adverb rather than an adjective. So in this case, we would go and say, okay, well, it's not going to be A because that's an adjective. And it's not going to be B because that's another adjective. But what about C versus D? Quite well and thoroughly, or well? So this is where we have to use that third step of the method. It needs to be correct. Both C and D are using adverbs to describe a verb. So that is correct. But it also needs to be concise. Well, that's going to make the difference between C and D. C and D both communicate the same idea, but D uses far fewer words. And now let's plug it in, make sure that this makes sense. These ancient fragments, which have been preserved well by the dry environment of the danger cave. Okay, show that the early Native Americans mastered the art of weaving. There we go. So C is way too long. We're going to go with answer choice D. Let's work on this one, breaking it down. All right, let's move on now to math. Okay, in fact, before we do that, I want everyone to think right now of something that they've just learned with that ACT English method and the practice that we did. Now, you don't have to write it in the chat. In fact, where I'd really like you to write this is somewhere that you are going to keep. So it can be like a notepad on your computer. It can be a piece of paper. It can be a journal where you have been doing some practice. It can also certainly be here in the chat if you like. What is something that you've learned? What is something that you want to remember? Right? And so some of you are asking, like, how do I study? How do I learn? How do I remember some of this stuff? And one of the best ways to do that is every time you attend a session like this, every time you do some practice problems on your own, every time you review some work, at the end of that, or anytime you've learned something, write it down. Make a note, because I don't know if you're like me, but there's a lot of times where I think of something, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so good. I want to remember that. And then like an hour later, I'm like, wait a second. what was I thinking? It was really good. I know it was good. I wanted to remember it. I liked it a lot, right? Have you ever been in that situation? And then suddenly it's like, oh man, you totally forgot it. Well, don't do that here. So right now, I'm going to pause, give you a little bit of time. Write down a takeaway for ACT English. What is something that you don't want to forget? All right, and I'm seeing some of you sharing some of these in the chat, which I love. The answer has to be concise, absolutely. If you didn't know that and you were just trying to go with like which one's grammatically correct, you're gonna find that in some cases you have two answers that are grammatically correct, and how would you ever pick between them? Probably can cause a lot of stress. And now you know, go with the shortest one. That's gonna be a big one. Okay, let's take a look now at our math strategy here. So the first thing we're going to do is state what the question is asking. Now, here's the thing about stating what the question is asking. A lot of people are probably like, well, of course, the first thing I'm going to do is read the question. We can still read the question more efficiently with math if we go to the very end of the question, right? Especially with word problems. Have you ever seen a word problem where like you read the whole thing and you're like, you got all this information and you're like, what is going on here? All this stuff. And then at the very end, you finally get to the question and you're like, oh, that's what I'm supposed to do. And then you got to go back and like reread the whole thing again, because now that you know what you're supposed to do, you have to go and like grab all the information to do it. Well, we're going to shortcut that. Rather than doing that and wasting all that time, just go to the end, rephrase the question in your own words. Sometimes what this means is that you just have to underline the question part. Sometimes you just, are like, oh, I'm solving for X. Sometimes you just have to pause for 2 seconds and think about it, but you want to just state or restate what the question's asking in your own words. Now, then you're going to go and see what type of information you have. What are you given? What do the answer choices look like? What format are they in? All that is potential information here. And finally, you're going to choose your approach. Now, there's a lot of different ways you can get to the right answer on an ACT math question, because ACT math questions, first off, one guest asked, is there a calculator or non-calculator part? Nope. On the ACT, you get a calculator for every single math question. That's one of those big differences between SAT and ACT math. ACT math, you get a calculator for every single question. The other thing about choosing your approach is you don't have to do it the math class way, because the only thing the test cares about is which answer you bubble. The test does not care how you pick which answer you bubble. The test only cares that you bubble in the right one. So there's lots of different ways you can do an ACT math problem. Sometimes you can just do the math, right? It's an algebra question. You're like, cool, algebra. You just do some algebra and you get the answer. Other times you might say, you know what, I'm actually going to test the answer choices instead. Maybe that's going to be faster for you. Or maybe it's just going to be more efficient because you're not quite sure what the algebra is asking you to do. You're not quite sure how to set the problem up, but you know how to test the answer choices because it makes sense to you in that way. Other times it might be giving you a really abstract kind of ratio, and you're like, oh, this abstract ratio business and percentages is like really obnoxious. Let me just pick a value and I'm going to just like test a sample real world value, and you can solve a problem that way. Or sometimes you can just guess and move on to the next one. If a question is not worth your time, if you're looking at it and you're like, I have no idea. Or if you're looking at the question and you're like, this is stressing me out. Or if you try a question and you're like, this is taking me way too long, guess and move on to the next one. That is sometimes the smartest possible thing you can do. It sounds kind of really weird to say the way to increase your score is sometimes to do fewer problems, but to get those problems right. But that is 100% the way you need to think about it. And I find this is especially true with math. You don't need to necessarily do all the questions in order. If you find a question that's giving you trouble, don't do it. Skip it. Guess and move on to the next one. There's going to be lots of questions you can do, so spend your time on those. Don't waste your time on the other ones. They'll be there. If you get all the ones that you can do done, you got plenty of others to try, but that way you can take some of the pressure of the clock off your back. And that also means that you will be able to spend your time on questions that you can do, that you know how to do. That's where your points are going to come from, right? Your points are going to come from the questions that you know how to do. Your points are not going to come from questions that you don't quite know or that are stressing you out. So do the easy for you questions first. Always, always, always. A lot of people have maybe you're feeling this way right now. I get a lot of skepticism on this. We all do, right? Laura, Steve, Chris, Katie, they're like, you're telling me to skip questions? You're telling me to guess and not even try? Yeah, I am. Because you know the types of questions that you understand. You know, if you read it and you're like, I don't know what I'm trying to do here, move on. Don't let a question become testy quicksand, right? Do the next one. That is, in fact, a strategic approach to the math test. It's not quitting, it's being smart, because you're basically doing things in the order of your strengths and skill set. And then finally, we're going to confirm that we answered the right question. Now, this doesn't mean, did you bubble it in correctly? You know, like, did I bubble in question number 5 and 5 on my bubble grid? I mean, do that too, right? Don't miss bubble, that'd be terrible. But it also means that, remember this thing that you underlined or restated for yourself at the beginning? It means that you're doing that, right? Because a lot of these questions have multiple steps or multiple parts. And if you stop too soon, if you don't go all the way to the end, guess what? There's going to be an answer choice there sometimes just waiting to catch you with very good math, but just not enough math. Now, Guess 400 asked a great question. Are all the questions worth the same point value? Mm-hmm. Yep. If you see an ACT math question that's like 2 plus 2 equals, you probably won't. But if you see that, that is worth the exact same amount of points as some word problem that requires you to like draw out a triangle and do some geometry and like take 3 minutes doing stuff. So they're all worth the same amount. By the way, this is also why I'm not going to bother saying like, you have 60 questions in 60 minutes. That's a minute per question. It's not. You should not be trying to do every question in a minute, because some questions are going to be easier for you and you're going to do them really, really quickly. And some questions are going to take you longer, and that's okay, because you need to work at the pace that you need to work at in order to get the question right. So don't try to speed up to improve your score. I mean, if you're wasting time like looking out the window, then yeah, maybe you should speed up a little. But if you're actually working on the math and doing it methodically, then what you probably need to do is just do the questions in a different order. Do the easier ones first and save those time-consuming ones for later on, and that will improve your score. All right, so here are some of those approaches I talked about, right? Straightforward math, picking numbers. This is where we would maybe like use a sample value. Back solving is a really fancy way of just saying test the answer choices. Eliminate things that don't work. Sometimes I've seen questions that's like X is negative and there's like 2 positive answers. Get rid of them. Or just guessing and moving on. There is no answer penalty for guessing, by the way. So you should never leave a question blank, ever. So if you're skipping over a question, just bubble in your letter of the day. Your letter of the day is the letter that you're feeling good on, A, B, C, or D. Bubble that in and move on to the next question, because hey, you could guess right. There's no penalty for guessing. Now, algebra is a huge part of the ACT, and the other big chunk of questions comes from geometry. So we're going to review some geometry here, because geometry tends to be a part of the ACT math that is a little rustier for most people, because most of you are probably in algebra or have taken algebra more recently than you've done geometry. So sometimes some of these geometry concepts get a little rusted. We got to brush them off. Quick terminology check. You're not tested on vocab terms on the ACT math section, but you'll often need to know what some of these terms mean in order to be able to use this information effectively and appropriately. So we have different angle types, right? If an angle is less than 90 degrees, it's an acute angle. If an angle is exactly 90 degrees, it's a right angle. And if an angle is bigger than that, it's an obtuse angle. Okay, so some pretty basic terms here. We also have different angle relationships. Tell me in the chat, what could we say about angle X, Y, and Z? We see that all 3 of these angles are forming this straight line. So you need to know some of those angle relationships. So we could call X, Y, and Z collectively a straight angle because they're forming that straight line. They equal 180 degrees because a straight angle always equals 180 degrees. And we could also call these three angles supplementary. And then we have these angles over here. And we could, there's lots of different relationships we could talk about here. For instance, we see that A and B are forming a straight angle. So are D and C. But also these angles across from each other, these vertical angles like A and C right here or B and D right here, these are equal. So vertical angles are angles that are formed by two intersecting lines. It's the angles across from each other, and they are equal, or to use another geometry term, congruent, if we wanted to be, you know, really fancy about it. So two angles are complementary if they add up to 90, and as you're telling me in the chat, supplementary if they equal 180 degrees. Know these two terms and know that complementary is 90 and supplementary is 180. Couple ways to remember this. I always remember like C comes before S in the alphabet, so 90 is less than 180. That's one way to remember it. But recently I had a colleague say, well, two C's form an S. And I'm like, whoa, they totally do. I'm gonna do it this way. Two C's form an S. Like, that's crazy. Just like 290 degrees form a 180. That's another way you could remember it. So a couple different terms there. All right, now let's talk about our parallel line transversal system. By the way, if you see a question on test day that says like line 1 is parallel to line 2 and it's not asking about slope, look for that transversal. Sometimes what you have to do is extend the parallel lines out in the diagram to really visualize it, but it'll be there. So when we have parallel lines like line 1 and line 2, two lines that'll never, ever, ever intersect, and we have a line that goes through them, it creates 8 angles, which we can see here, but only 2 angle measurements. All the acute angles are equal, and all the obtuse angles are equal. And you might know some terms for those. A and D are vertical angles, A and E are corresponding angles. You don't have to know the terms on the test. You just need to know that, hey, parallel line transversal system, all the acute angles are equal, all the obtuse angles are equal every single time. All right, let's apply this now to some ACT questions. And again, go ahead and vote in the poll rather than putting your answers in the chat so we can keep that chat spoiler free. I'm actually gonna be quiet for a second here so I can give you an opportunity to think through this question on your own and then try it but I want you to apply that method. So I want you to see what the question's asking first, look at the information you're given, figure out how you're gonna approach it, and then answer the question. All right, let's take a look at this one here. We actually have to know a couple terms here in order to work through question number 4. Now, I saw a question, let's see if I can find it. I think it was from one of the guests. It says, so should I look over this section to see which ones I can do and not do before I start? And I wouldn't spend a whole lot of time flipping through the entire section and be like, do it, don't do it, do it, don't do it, don't do it, do it, do it. But what you could do is just, as you encounter the problem, make that judgment, right? Look at a problem and be like, I'm going to do it, and then do it. Or if you see a problem, you read it and you're like, nope, then nope your way out of it, bubble in a letter of the day and move on. A lot of you are asking, is C the best one to guess? I mean, if C is your lucky letter, but A, B, C, D, they're all going to be equally right across the entirety of the test. So it doesn't really matter which one you guess the letter that you like. There's no like advantage to any, there's no strategy for guessing other than just guess the same thing every time if it's a guess. So for this one, first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the question. We want to know, what is Y in terms of X? So Y in terms of X means that all of these answer choices here are like Y equals something. And now I see that A and B are perpendicular. Now, this is important because perpendicular gives me a numeric value. Perpendicular lines create what type of angle? So that's how we're going to get some sort of number in this situation. So perpendicular lines are going to equal 90 degrees. So if A and B are perpendicular, then I know that this angle right here is 90 degrees. Now, it kind of looks like maybe X is half of that, but I don't want to rely on maybes on test day. So I don't know that X is 45, and I don't know that Y equals X because they're not vertical angles. But you know what is a vertical angle to Y? This angle right here. So this angle is right across from this angle, which means that this angle right here also equals Y. And now, because you're telling me that we've got that 90-degree angle, we've got those right angles, we can actually write an equation, X plus Y equals 90. And now we can answer the question, what is Y in terms of X? Well, Y equals 90 minus X. We subtract X from both sides, and that's going to match up with answer choice H. So this question required you to apply your knowledge of vertical angles, right? Recognizing that this angle right here is across from this angle right here. Those are both vertical. And recognizing that perpendicular means forming a 90-degree or a right angle. Once you put those pieces of information together, you can actually answer this question. All right, let's try another one that has some angles here. So this time our question is, what is angle BCD? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come back and say BCD. Okay, this is the angle right here that I'm solving for. Remember, that first step is always to figure out what are you trying to do. And in this case, I'm trying to solve for this angle right here. Now we have some other information. I'm told that ABC is 45. Okay, that's in the diagram. And I'm told that CDE is 55 or 155. That's also in the diagram. And I want to solve for BCD. This question is going to rely upon geometry's favorite number, because you can see here that we've got a couple different types of straight angles. We also have a triangle that's being formed. I'm going to give you some time to think about this one and to finish working through it on your own, but go ahead and bubble in your answer to the poll once you've got it. Okay, what we're going to have to do here is recognize a couple straight angles and a triangle. So the first thing we're going to do is I can figure out what this angle is right here, because I know that 45 degrees and that angle are going to be supplementary. I can do the same thing over here because I know that this angle and that angle are also supplementary. And so when I put all that information together, I can say that, okay, so this angle right here has to equal 135 degrees because those are two supplementary angles. And then this angle over here also is supplementary. So it's also going to equal 180 degrees when I add it to angle D right here. That's going to be 25. And now we can answer the question. All right, I can say, all right, I've got 3 angles in a triangle. I know 2 of them. I can figure out what this one is because it's also going to add up to 120 degrees. I'm sorry, 180 degrees, which gives us 20. Got to make sure I'm looking at the right thing so that my eyes and my tongue align themselves here. So these all add up to 180 degrees, and so we can solve therefore 20, and our answer here is B, 20 degrees. So again, all of these questions are worth the same amount of points. Like every English question within the section is equivalent to all other English questions. Every math question in the section is all equivalent to all the others. I saw a question like, why should we guess the same letter every time rather than like beep, bop, booping around, or do like an A, B, C, D, E, D, C, B, A type thing? And it comes down to, in fact, a math concept of probability, right? Because each answer choice is likely to appear roughly the same amount of times. If you guess the same thing every single time, eventually you're more likely to guess correct. Whereas if you are moving around all the time, you are more likely to inadvertently just miss, bubble, you're guessing around the right answer. So if you just like bubble, if you're, think of it as if all the ones you were guessing on were like right next to each other, right? If you just bubbled an A for all of them, some of those are probably going to be A, right? As opposed to if you like moved around, who knows what you could get. So it has to do with the probability of guessing correct. So just doesn't matter what letter you guess, but just guess the same thing every single time. Okay. So Esmeralda says, well, I did it somewhat differently. I did 145 and 155, and then subtracted. So there are other theorems you can use here. We can use like the external angle theorems. But one of the one way that we're doing it is because these external angles, they are going to be kind of supplementary here. So the fact that you subtracted it from, so if you subtract the sum of these and you subtract 180 from it, you in essence just kind of shortcutted some of the work here. We could in fact, that is another triangle theorem. You basically derived a triangle theorem if you did it that way. So nice work. There's again, multiple ways to get to the right answer here. Let's do one more math question together. Now, we see parallel lines. So as soon as we see parallel lines, we are looking for that transversal, which we see right here. We want to know what is the angle of X. Okay. Well, we know that all acute angles in a parallel line transversal system are equal. All acute angles in a parallel line transversal system are equal. Well, we know that this is acute, this is obtuse. So they're not going to be equal. We can, in fact, already eliminate 40 from our answer choice. But I also know that any acute angle plus any obtuse angle will be supplementary. That's all we have to do for this question is just recognize, oh yeah, they're going to be supplementary. So if X plus 40 equals 180, then X equals 180 minus 40, which is answer choice K. Now, I see, guys says, does the math question start easy and get harder? I don't like to use the words easy and hard because easy for you, harder for you, right? Every single one of you is going to think that certain things are easy, but you might not all think the same things are easy. But what I can say is that as you move through the math test from like question 1 to question 60, the questions start off more with more foundational math topics. And towards the end, the questions ask about more advanced math topics. Now, whether that's easier or harder for you, I don't know. And then usually in the middle, there's some that are like multi-step questions that are on foundational topics interspersed with like single step questions from advanced topics. And so you might actually find that some of the advanced material is easier for you because maybe you're just doing it in school recently, or maybe some of the multi-step problems take more work. But they do tend to go in increasing, I will say, complexity. Whether it's because the math is more advanced or because they require more work, that is a true statement. But that doesn't mean that just that you should do like all the questions in order, because there very well may be a question that kind of trips you up early on, and there could be some very straightforward and easy questions for you later on. So the real strategy there is, if you see a question that you don't like, skip it. Just be like, nope, your way out of that question. There is no question worth getting stressed or panicked about on the ACT. Bubble in a gas, move on to the next one. There will be questions you can do. And then once you've done all the ones that you know how to do, know that you've banked all those points. That's an awesome feeling. And then you can start going back and trying some of the others, and you don't have to worry about time. Because if you run out of time, oh well, you already banked all of those points. So now anything that you get is like extra points. So it's a way of not having to worry about the clock. Because the clock is, of course, an obnoxious thing. And often when we start worrying about the clock, we miss questions we should have gotten right because of silly mistakes, because you're rushing, because of panic, because of things like that. All right, one last math question here. I'm going to give you time to try this one on your own. Think about some of those terms we've talked about, and then we'll review it. Okay, some of you might still be working on this one, but I think we can at least have all had a chance to kind of read through the question and think about what it's asking. We have some terms. Again, this term perpendicular comes in. So when in doubt, draw it out. PQ is perpendicular to RS. Boom, there it is. PQ and RS are forming at that 90-degree angle. And then L is like somewhere over here. I don't know where L is. I'm going to draw it right there. But I could have drawn L anywhere. I could have drawn L over here. I could have drawn L over there. I could have drawn L like pretty much anywhere in here that I wanted. So what do we know about LQR? LQR could be anywhere in here. One thing we do know about it is that it's definitely bigger than 90 degrees, because LQR is going to be 90 degrees plus something. There's only one answer choice that's bigger than 90, so we're going to bubble A, and we're going to move on. Now, Joe says, can you draw it? Yes, yes, you can. If you're taking the test on paper, you can draw it in your test booklet. If you're taking it on the computer, you can draw it on scratch paper. But yes, when in doubt, draw it out. All right. Well, we've done English, we've done math. Let's talk about reading. I know quite a few of you wanted to talk about reading. Oh, before we move on to reading, someone asked, do we need to know proofs? No, I purged them from my memory. Yeah, I'm with you. You will not have to do any geometric proofs on the ACT. Okay, well, let's take a look at ACT reading. I know there was a lot of questions I saw. Many of you had like, how do I not zone out? How do I focus? How do I stay interested in the ACT? And maybe you feel that more specifically when it comes to reading, where you have lots and lots of words. So here's our reading passage strategy. We're actually breaking it up into the passage and the questions. Remember, the ACT is a standardized test, which means that even though there's no way that we can tell you what passages you're going to get on test day, any of us, Chris, Steve, Laura, Katie, myself, we can all tell you exactly what types of things the questions are going to ask you about. Like right now, we can tell you that because they ask about the same things every single time. And because of that, it means you can read the passages thinking about that same information every single time. So if you've been, have any of you been in like it's like the chicken and the egg discussion of the ACT, questions or passage, guess what? We've got an answer for you. And it is passage. Passage first. Bailey asks, are we allowed to annotate? Yes, you are. And in fact, One of the things you want to, that can really increase your reading score is knowing how to read actively and how to annotate efficiently. Now, we're only going to have like 15, 20 minutes to talk about reading. So I'm going to do a best job I can to try to give you like the big picture of how to do this. But know that this is one of those skills that is super, super useful, but also takes practice, right? This has a learning curve to it, but you've got to practice it in order to master it. So look at the blurb, and then you're going to read each paragraph actively. Actively, by the way, does not just mean have a pencil in your hand and write some notes, although you're going to want to do that. You're going to want to have the pencil in your hand, sit up straight, pay attention to the passage, write some notes. That's going to help you focus. If you are reading the passage like this, like you're already like setting yourself up to lose focus. So sit up straight when it comes to the reading, grab your pencil, be like, okay, here we go. Let's do it. Actively reading, though, doesn't just mean like physically actively writing something. It means thinking. Active reading is an anticipatory exercise. It's using things like topic sentence and transition words to kind of anticipate where the passage is going. And you can do that. You can learn how to do that. That's how our brains work. That's how reading works, in fact. And you can refine that skill so that you can already kind of know what the author is going to say before the author says it. And then when the author does say it, you're like, oh yeah, I already knew this. And you can already kind of categorize it. A lot of you, I see you're saying, I can't read very fast. How do I read faster? Guess what? It's not about reading faster. Your reading speed is going to be your reading speed for the next couple of months. Now, you can become a faster reader by reading a lot, reading anything, reading everything. That is how you become a faster reader. But if you're taking the test in the next couple of months, I'm going to be honest, like speed reading does not help you on the ACT. But learning how to read more efficiently is going to be how you can move more quickly through the passage, even though your reading speed is the exact same. And that's the goal here. And then, of course, we're going to have to tackle these questions. Look at the question stem, not the answer choices, just the question. Go back, find the answer in the passage. It's there. There's proof. There's a clue for every single question on the ACT. Predict the answer in your brain or in the passage, and then just match it up. That's going to help a lot with second guessing. If you get stuck in second guess land, especially on something like reading, don't read the answer choices first. Read the question, try to answer it using the passage or your brain, passage and your brain rather, and then just match it up. So let's go ahead and actively read this passage together, which means we are going to have to anticipate. So you don't have the passage in front of you. So for now, I want you to get your fingers on the keyboard rather than with the pencil. But here we go. I want us to just look at, first off, this is an essay about astrobiology. Okay, some of you might be like, cool, astrobiology, can't wait. Some of you might be like, no, thank you. Either way, it doesn't matter. We know that this is an essay. It's about astrobiology, so we can already anticipate, like, it's going to tell us some stuff about that. So let's look at our topic sentence. And based on our topic sentence, I want you to tell me, what do you think this paragraph, not the passage, what do you think this first paragraph is going to tell you about? Astrobiology, also known as exobiology, is the complex multidisciplinary science dedicated to studying the possibility of life outside the confines of Earth. Now, we're just looking at this topic sentence. So tell me in the chat, what do you think you're going to read about in this paragraph? What types of information, what types of details might be in this first paragraph? Okay. Our topic sentence here was basically like just a definition of astrobiology, life outside of Earth. So we might predict that this is going to tell us kind of like more about what it is, or like how they do it. But it's going to be something about like just details about what astrobiology is, because they gave us kind of an astrobiology definition. So astrobiology definition, I see the Mongol says a summary of astrobiology. Yep, yeah, defining the term, right? How it functions. We're looking for aliens, yeah, alien life. So that's what we're looking here. So it's kind of like, I like this, a summary of astrobiology, looking for life outside of Earth. Like, how do we do it? What's the process? And so what I want you to do is read the rest of this paragraph. Now, you're not reading for details. This is an open book test in the sense, open note. You're going to have this passage in front of you on test day. You can go back to it. There's no reason to memorize anything in the passage. What I want you to do is I want you to read this paragraph, but I want you to assess, like, okay, is what I thought this paragraph is about, is that what I actually read about? Is this about like researching life outside of Earth, what astrobiology is, like what space biology is? Is that what this first paragraph is about? Our next sentence is like kind of like the history of it. Humans have speculated whether we're alone, and then we could go into space in the 50s and 60s. Then maybe we could find alien life. And then our next sentence is like, okay, scientists work to build these landers, and then they explore these planets. So yeah, this is like how we do it. This is like looking for life in space. Kind of history of it, what it is, process of it, kind of general big picture. What is astrobiology? What's its point? And that's the level of detail you need to know here. You need to know, like, hey, if there's something that's asking me about like what astrobiology is, I'm going to go back to the first paragraph. All right, let's look at the second paragraph. Okay. When the first of 2 Viking landers touched down on soil on some date that we don't even care about and began to send camera images back to Earth, the scientists could not suppress a nervous anticipation. Now, I have highlighted, or maybe if I was writing with a pencil, I would have underlined nervous anticipation, because this is how people feel. This is the emotion. This is like the drama of these passages. Some of you are asking, like, how do you stay interested? Look for the drama and make it a game. Gamify it. Be like, okay, what does the topic sentence tell me? Can I, in fact, guess what the whole paragraph is about based on the topic sentence? Where's the drama? Where's the drama words? Where's the transition words? Make it a game for yourself. I mean, maybe that's still not like the super most fun game ever, but it is still a lot more interesting than like letting all the words just like float in front of your face. If you're letting the words float in front of your face, you're going to lose interest. You have to be engaging with them, thinking about them, anticipating with them. So we've got these Viking landers, they're on Mars. What do we think the scientists are nervously anticipating? Based on the first paragraph, based on this, what do you think they're waiting to find out? I bet you're right. I bet they're sending these photos and these soil samples back, and the scientists cannot wait to see, is there life on Mars? Let's find out. Like people who hold a ticket, they had a 1 in a million chance of winning. The photographs that arrived, however, womp womp, did not contain any evidence. Boo. But you know what? We anticipated that that's what the scientists were wondering. They were like, is there life on Mars? And then the answer came back, no. But we still had, we still kind of thought ahead. You can in fact predict where the passages are going. Instead, it tells us they revealed this barren landscape, looks like a desert. So we get our first photos back. There's no signs of life. It just looks like a desert. Okay. But notice how you're still able to anticipate this. We read this and they're like, is there aliens? Is there life? And that's exactly what the rest of the paragraph was about. The rest of the paragraph was answering the scientists' questions. Is there aliens? Is there life? And turns out, no. It just looks like a desert. But this was, we still got more passage to read. So let's see if it changes. The scientists were soon ready to turn their attention from visible life to microorganisms. Oh, interesting. Tell me in the chat, what do you think this paragraph is going to tell you more about? And here's the thing. It's okay to be wrong and then be surprised. But the more you do this, the more you practice using topic sentences, using those like emotional words, using transition words like that, however, or but, or in addition to, the more you practice using them, the better you're going to get at anticipating what's coming next. And that's when you become a more efficient reader. And the more efficient you are, the faster you will be. You'll also be a lot more accurate when it comes to the questions, which is an extra important thing. So they're looking for visible life to microorganisms. So now they're looking for life in other forms. I like this, guess 7621. Microorganisms, do we have microbiotic life? Is there like their life we can't see? So we're still searching for microscopic life forms. And as we read the rest of the paragraph, researchers thought it was possible that life had developed. You're totally right. They're looking for these microorganism life forms here. To detect biological activity, samples were treated with nutrients. So all of this is just like a lot of detail about looking for microscopic life. We don't care about all the details. We just care about the big picture. So this is about looking for microscopic life. They think maybe there will be. Maybe life had developed on Mars just like Earth. So they're looking at Martian soil samples just like they were looked at the Earth soil samples. And then what are the results? The results from all three were womp womp, inconclusive, but a fourth was unexpected. So they didn't find anything, but there was this unexpected result. Okay, so they looked for life in other forms, didn't find it. And so now they're like, the absence of organic materials, some scientists speculated, was the result of intense ultraviolet radiation penetrating the atmosphere and destroying organic compounds in the soil. So we don't need to think about the science here. We just need to care about, okay, this is their explanation. This is why they're like, maybe this is why there's no life. And then we have, although the atmosphere was rich at one time, so we're talking about the atmosphere. So here's the result. This atmosphere, Martian atmosphere, maybe it's gone because it destroyed the soil. It was really thick, but now it's gone. And then it tells us what this means. So this means even if life had started, the atmosphere disappeared and then it killed it. Notice how we zoomed out here. I didn't read this passage in a really like sciencey way for a reason. It's because you don't have to understand these passages at a really detailed, microscopic, if I can do that, level. You just need to get kind of like a big picture idea. So tell me in the chat, what was this passage about? Not the part, what was this whole passage about? If you had to sum it up in like half a sentence, what's the main idea here? Well, we're looking for life on Mars, right? Life on Mars, is there any? Searching for life on Mars, astrobiology, what is it? But specifically, we're not talking about astrobiology broadly, right? We didn't talk about any place other than Mars. We didn't say, is there life on Saturn? Is there life on asteroids? Is there life out in space? We specifically were looking for like, is there life on Mars? That's what the astrobiology part was about. So looking for life in space, yes, but specifically life on Mars. Why we didn't find any, that we didn't find any. Do aliens exist on Mars? Yes, awesome. So you can take a really complex topic, like some of you might have been like, oh my gosh, astrobiology, I have not taken this class in school. To be like, oh yeah, we're just like looking for life on Mars, we didn't find any. Maybe it's the atmosphere's fault. That's all you need to move on to the questions. Now, when you get to the questions, we're gonna like pretend that these answer choices aren't here. Now for this one, I have my answer choices up already because one of the main points of the second paragraph is, if we've taken notes on the second paragraph, we can just go back and look at our notes. And our notes say, first photos, no life. Okay, that's what we kind of said that paragraph was about. So which of these match up with the note that we already took, which says photos came back, scientists looked for life, womp womp, there weren't any? Let's look it up. Scientists were disappointed. No, they were disappointed they didn't see life on Mars, but that their results were inconclusive. Wait a second. This was paragraph 3, not paragraph 2. Theories about, nope, we don't have any theories here. We just have no life on Mars. There was no experimental confirmation that life on Mars existed. That matches up with exactly what our note was. And that matches up with what the passage said. Photos came back, scientists were excited. There was no life on Mars. Sad trombone. And as soon as you see an answer choice that matches, you're done. Notice how we made a prediction first. We didn't read each of these answer choices and try to like plug it in and be like, does it work? Does it work? Does it work? We made a prediction first. We said, is there life? Okay, the scientists said there was no life. Which of these says the same thing? And that's really, really, really going to help with second guessing. Let's look at our next one. According to the passage, which of the following describes the atmosphere? I don't have to have remembered this. We can go back to the passage, to the atmosphere passage, right? We saw all those sentences about atmosphere. So let's pull up that last passage and see what it actually says. What does the passage actually say about atmosphere of Mars? It was one time rich in carbon dioxide and thick enough to protect from rays, but carbon dioxide left and it was thin. So this is what it actually says. So we can take that as a prediction and match it up. Which of these matches up with where it says was at one time rich in carbon dioxide, but then the atmosphere became thinner? Now we have to be careful here because A actually says rich in carbon dioxide. And this was the atmosphere of Mars, right? But if we go back, it says it was at one time rich, but its surface, it gradually left. It could not have exposed the ultra radiation and the atmosphere thinned. Mars never developed a protective layer of ozone like Earth. So if we want to know what describes the atmosphere of Mars currently, we know that it was at one time rich in carbon dioxide, but not anymore. Now it lacks that protective layer, and that matches up with answer choice B. So you can, in fact, kind of just use that passage there as your guide. You don't have to memorize this stuff. Go back, see what the passage actually says. Make sure that just because the words are in the passage, you're not selecting them because they're there. The context also has to match. Although it was rich at one time, now it doesn't have that protective layer of ozone. Okay. Here's our final method. We're going to talk about ACT science for a minute. I love talking about ACT science, and some of you may think the science is your worst. I know there's a lot of people who don't like the science test. It is the last one. You're kind of tired by the time you get to it, but just like reading, with practice and with a good method, you can really, really, really make the science test easier for yourself, or you can dramatically overcomplicate it. So let's talk about how to make it easier so that you're not having to overcomplicate it. The first thing you're going to do is identify the passage type. There are 3 different science passage types. There's data representation, which is like mostly charts, graphs, and figures. There's experimental design or research summaries, I guess, which is an experimental passage. Shows some experiment summaries. And then there's one conflicting viewpoint. Now, a lot of you might be thinking, the science, oh my gosh, if I didn't like reading the reading, I don't want to like reading the science. There's no way I can read all that and answer the questions in 35 minutes. And guess what? I got good news for you. You shouldn't. No one can. I can't, Laura can't, Steve can't, Katie can't, Chris can't. None of us have time to read all the science passages and answer the questions in 35 minutes. They're not designed that way, so don't do it. You don't actually need to read most of the science passages to answer the questions. So unlike reading, where you really, really should learn how to passage map and actively read those passages ahead of time, with science, the main goal here is not to read the passages. It's to just analyze what you need, go to the questions, and get out of there with as much limited time as possible. So the first step is to analyze the passage type. Identify the passage type. Analyze strategically. And what this means is, depending on the passage, you're going to look for certain things. Now, we're going to look at a data passage today. And for the data passages and the experimental passages, what is strategic is to look for the variables. So there's 3 different types of passages. There's, I kind of use a shorthand, but data representation, I call them data. Research methods, or research summaries, I kind of call it experiments because there's experiments in it, and the conflicting viewpoints. And it's not important to know like their official ACT name so much as it is that you can look at them and know the difference. That you can look at a passage and be like, that's a data passage, or that's a conflicting viewpoints passage. That's what matters. Once you know what type of passage you have, you'll know how to approach it. With the conflicting viewpoints passage, the ones that's like mostly words, you actually do have to read that one. But if it's any of the other 5 passages, you actually don't need to read it. You just need to like look for the variables and go on to the questions. And then these last 2 steps should look really similar. That's basically how we did reading. Look at the question stem, go and answer it, and then just match up your answer with an answer choice. Now, guess is, do we need to know science concepts? Very minimally, very rarely. There will be probably 1 question on the science test that asks you to actually know something. And the thing you have to know is going to be probably pretty basic, like think of whatever science class you took in 9th grade. So it won't, you do not need to take any specialized science class to get that 1 question right. And if you don't know it, you know what, it's 1 question. So just like make your best guess and move on. But otherwise, no, this is mostly, you have to know how graphs work, how tables work, and you need to know basically like how independent and dependent variables work. That's it. So let's look at this passage and identify it. Now, on the actual test, these graphs would be like way bigger. So we have 1 little teeny paragraph of text. I know it looks like a lot on the screen right now, but that's just so it's big so you can see it. 1 little paragraph of text, like 100 words, and mostly charts and graphs. So this is a data representation passage. And guess what? When we have a data representation passage, we don't read them. We go straight to the charts and graphs and figures and see what's going on. What are our variables? What are our units? And then we're just going to move on straight to the questions. So we're just going to like skip over all this background info. If you need a term defined later on, you can go back. It's there. You can look at it. I'm not saying you can never look at it, but you just shouldn't read it ahead of time until you see a question that maybe says like, do I need something else? And then it's there for you. So let's look at our figures. So it tells me figure 1 is for water and figure 2 is for carbon dioxide. So I am actually going to label that because that was in the text and I don't want to confuse them. I want to know why they're different. So let's look at these 2 figures, and I want to think about our variables here. The independent variable is what is being controlled or what is being changed. And the dependent variable is what is being measured. And if you want a little bit more of an in-depth on that, we did have those math science workshops that go a bit more into detail about this. But what we do here is we would take this and we'd say, okay, so what's being measured in figure 1? And if you've seen something like this before, this is a really specific and kind of a really complicated type of graph because this is a phase diagram. And phase diagrams are way different than our normal graphs that just have like X, Y axes. But what we're measuring here is the state of, in this case, the water. Is it a gas? Is it a liquid? Is it a solid? And my variables are temperature and pressure. And so I would make a note of that. My independent variable is temperature and pressure. And what I'm measuring is what phase it's in. Figure 2 is actually the exact same. Temperature, pressure, I'm measuring the phase. It just happens to be that it's carbon dioxide. So I saw a question from, I guess, so for science, questions before passage, not quite. For science, it is what are the variables? What's the independent variable? What's the dependent variable? Then questions. So you're not reading the passage, you're just analyzing quickly to figure out this stuff, right? We're like, what's going on here? Okay, I got temperature, pressure, and I'm measuring phase for water and carbon dioxide. Cool. And then we're moving on to the questions. So you're analyzing it, right? And I say analyze very specifically because you're not reading it. You don't got time. No one's got time to read it all, but you do just want to look for very specific things depending on the type of passage that you have. So now that we've done this, let's go on to our questions, because most of the questions are not going to require any more than what we just did. So based on figure 2, well, let's pull it up. CO2, okay, that was figure 2, exists in the liquid phase, let's find it, between which of the following temperatures? We'll go ahead and vote in the poll. We're looking for the temperature that's on my x-axis where I get a liquid. All right, well, I look at my liquid right here. I see that my left-hand limit is like right somewhere just north of -60. And my right-hand limit is like right here. That's like between 20 and 40. And oh, there's only one answer choice that matches up with it. Answer choice G. Now, I guess 4518 says, I thought the independent variable is usually on the X and dependent is usually on the Y. You're right. That is usually the case. Generally, for a normal graph, your independent variables on the X-axis and your dependent variables on the Y. This is a very specific type of figure, which is a phase diagram, where we're actually measuring like where the two axes intersect, right? So it's a very specific type of graph, but that does not mean that what you've learned is wrong. What you've learned is right and is often what you're going to see. But you could also see something like this, where what we're measuring is actually the state of two things intersecting, which you see typically in like phase diagrams like this. All right, let's try another one. Based on the data, the freezing point of carbon dioxide is approximately what? Oh my goodness. Freezing point was not listed on this diagram because we actually have to know some science. Quick, science for me. What does it mean to freeze? See what I mean when I say the science you have to know is probably science you've already been exposed to. You know what something means to freeze. Like, you don't have to put it in like super fancy pants science knowledge. Like, if something is freezing, if carbon dioxide is freezing, it is going from a liquid state to a solid state. That is like the definition of freezing. So we want to know, when is carbon dioxide going to freeze? When is carbon dioxide going to go from a liquid state to a solid state? Specifically at 70,000 mmHgs. By the way, you do not have to know what mmHg stands for. If you do, that's cool. Then you could read this as like millimeters of mercury. If you don't, you can call them like mhgs, and that's also fine, because you're not going to be tested on that. What we're being tested on is like, do we know what it means to freeze? Looks like you do. We're turning solid from a liquid. And let's extend this line. So I have to extend this up to 70,000 millimeters of mercury. And now I have to see, okay, so when does that happen? Let's drop it down to a temperature range. And it looks like it happens between like -40 and -60, roughly. Oh, there's only one in that range. We're good to go. You're never going to have to split hairs on the ACT science. So don't worry that you're going to like, is that 52? Is that -48.9? Like, it's between -40 and -60. Look at your answer choices. One's going to be there. Grab it and go. Right. So this is the type of science knowledge you will be required to know on test day. Things like, what does it mean to freeze? Right. If you're feeling good about that, then you should be feeling good that you have the science knowledge to rock this out. All right, last question. Different type of diagram here. Consider the carbon cycle in the diagram. Cool, there it is. We see it. What effect would a sudden drop in the amount of Earth's decay bacteria have in the carbon dioxide of the atmosphere? Again, this might sound like it's outside information, but we don't need to know any outside information. Oh, by the way, this is a totally new passage. We haven't even like seen the passage this is part of. Is that stressing anybody out, or do we feel like we're still going to be able to answer this question? Kind of threw that on you, didn't I? This is really just to illustrate you do not need to read the passage as long as you're interpreting the figures for most of those science passages. So let's just go find out where decay bacteria is. Looking, there it is. decay bacteria. Let's make a prediction. If we didn't have decay bacteria, what's going to happen to carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? I got to figure out where that is also. Oh, carbon dioxide in air. Okay, so if this goes down, how is that going to affect this? We can use the arrows of the diagram to tell us this. We don't have to know, we don't have to have the carbon cycle memorized. We don't have to know all this stuff. We just need to know, how do I read arrows? So if this goes down, then this arrow is going to not happen, or at least not happen as much. So this is also going to go down. And that can be our prediction. It's going to go down. So now let's look at our answer choices, and we're going to match that up. CO2 would drop because they're the sole source. I see like a whole bunch of arrows coming here, so that's not true. Would rise? No. Would decrease, but not completely drop because they're not the only source. There we go. It's going to drop, but it's not going to like go away because we have lots of other sources. And we can answer that one without even seeing the passage that this thing came from. So when it comes to science, analyze the variables, independent, dependent, what's on your graph, what's on your figure, where are your units, move on to the questions. Okay. What do we do from here? We just like gave you this like massive crash course in all the methods for all the tests. And I got to tell you, we just like info dumped a bunch of information on you. This was a ton of stuff. So a couple things. Know where you're at, know where you're going. Think about a study plan. A lot of you have been asking questions about study plans, which is fantastic. Try to do a little most days. A little bit most days is better than like just doing a whole bunch of it one day a week, every week. So if you can do like 20 minutes a day for most days, that's awesome. That's going to keep things fresh, keep things moving. Think about using the strategies. Review. I cannot emphasize review enough. A lot of people think that you just need to like be burning and churning questions all the time. You actually learn a whole lot more when you review something than when you just do something the first time, right? Think about this session. Did you learn more doing the problems, or did you learn more when we were discussing the problems, whether or not you got them right? You probably got more out of the review than actually doing the questions. Think about taking some full-length practice tests. There's lots of great full-length practice tests available to you. We have some that you can access, and tap sources of expertise. You all are doing this one because you're here. So think about your whys. That's going to help you stay motivated, right? Why are you doing it? Put it in perspective for yourself. And I really want to talk about staying motivated because I know it can be really hard to stay motivated right now, especially because there have been so many disruptions in like your normal flow of things. Recognize that burnout is a real thing. So if you are feeling burnout, then take a day off from the ACT. That's okay, right? You got to keep things balanced, keep things in perspective. Couple of questions I'm seeing come in. How do I watch this again? You can rewatch this on YouTube. It is posted up there, or it will be as soon as this is done. So you can rewatch this video. Don't just do question after question, right? Review. And strategies work for the ACT, also for the SAT as well. A couple of you are asking about ACT versus SAT. They're similar, but they are different tests. The best way to know which one you're going to like better is actually just to do a practice test for each one of them. I say a practice test, right? Because a lot of the strategies are the same, but the timing is a little different. The amount of math is quite a bit different. SAT doesn't have a science test, for instance, but the SAT has a lot of no calculator math, 50% of it's math. So there are some differences there. Which one's best for you? It's going to depend on your strengths. So take a practice test of each, see which one you like better. Maybe you like them both the same. Maybe you're dramatically like one better than the other. Remember, it is a marathon, not a sprint, right? You can't just like sprint out the gate. You will wear yourself out. You have to build endurance for this as well, right? Sitting for 3 hours takes endurance. Thinking for 3 hours takes endurance. So if you're figuring out like, how do I not zone out? Try to build up those study times, right? Train yourself to kind of sit and think for 20 minutes, then 30 minutes, then 45 minutes, then an hour, right? That's how you build up that stamina and endurance for test taking, just like you would build up stamina endurance for, say, running. Virtual studies like these, switch between paper and practice, and don't do the same thing every day, right? Some days do what you're strong at, some days do what you're struggling with. Don't just like do the struggle stuff all the time, right? That feels awful to do the stuff that's hard all the time. So mix it up, do the stuff you're good at, do the stuff you're struggling with, do the stuff you're good at, and do that balance so that you can remind yourself like, okay, this is hard for me, but like I've got this stuff. So make sure you do that balance. And by the way, doing the stuff you're good at is also going to help you keep that fresh. If you're unsure where to start, feel free to make an appointment with us at this link, Kaplan PC Teacher Talk. You can book me.me. I am so glad that